Mesdames et messieurs,
So we're going to start. Ladies and gentlemen, hello.
webinaire organisé par
Welcome to this new session of webinars organized by Digital Frontier Institute. We're very happy to see that there are so many people who are organized joining us. We are now greeting the Berlin Cash organization.
Partagez également avec nous les leçons tirées de l'expérience de Fintech et d'entreprises du secteur privé. Je suis Maxime Locossi, responsable du développement de la communauté francophone à DFI, et je suis assisté dans l'organisation matérielle de ce webinaire par Sarah Corley, Deputy Director à DFI. Bonjour Sarah.
Bonjour.
Alors, la session d'aujourd'hui durera en tout 1 heure d'horloge et aura la particularité d'être bilingue, c'est-à-dire que la présentation et les échanges seront en français et un service d'interprétation en anglais est disponible pour les participants.
English interpreting will be available for those English speakers who are with us. So you can choose the language channel of your choice, either French or English. And if you look at the bottom of your screen and in the middle of the screen, you can see the options.
The session is going to be conducted in French, and those of you who prefer to listen in English should choose the English channel in the language menu.
So this session will be recorded, and the video recording will be available as of Friday. The participants will be able to address their questions in English or in French to the experts via the chat box. I would now like to send the mic to Better Than Cash Alliance participants who have agreed to spend a little bit of their time with us. Today, Jean-Pascal will be the moderator for this session. Jean-Pascal? Hello, Maxime. It's really a big pleasure to be on the DFI platform this morning, sharing with all the colleagues from the various countries and institutions connected to this webinar. Now, when I looked at the list of participants, what I noticed is that many participants work in companies and organizations in the formal sector. They're sometimes very prestigious ones. But I would like us to not lose sight of something as we advance through this meeting. Next time that you leave your house, let's say to meet your doctor, and when you arrive at your doctor's, you show him your insurance card, I would like you to remember that from your house to your doctor's, 6 people out of 10 that you will have met on your way who are workers are excluded from having health insurance. 6 workers out of 10 worldwide. It's from the ILO, 6 workers out of 10, according to the International Labor Organization, don't have health insurance because their employers, when they pay to them, do not contribute to their health coverage. And that is something that is perfectly legal, and yet it is very unfair, especially in the context of the current crisis. These workers who are excluded from protection coverage receive their pay in cash. So the purpose of today's discussion is to know to what extent digitalization of payments to such workers can be an opportunity for the state to provide incentives for economic development, for the companies to meet certain.
Est-ce que ça peut être une opportunité pour
How can it be an opportunity for the Fintech operators or other financial service providers for a new growth niche? And to what extent is it an opportunity for all those workers? We're talking about more than half of all workers worldwide and the digitalization of their payment. It could be an opportunity for decent work, reducing inequity in how women and men are paid, inequity in how workers in the formal sector with contracts are treated unfairly in relation to seasonal workers, temporary workers, and workers in this informal sector. Today, we have a very interesting panel, Laurent Sautré, Chantal Gagné, and Marcel Prunier. Hello to all of you. Hello, Jean-Pascal. What we perhaps need to say is that in the aggregate, around the table, there are 50 cumulative years of experience in helping states, regulators, the private sector to implement inclusive payment system. Marjolaine Chantois is with Better Than Cash Alliance from the UN, where she works with the private sector, works with them to implement digital payment system. Sonia Anousami has worked with over 50 organizations in Africa and the Middle East, in the banking sector, Fintech, or government regulators. And Laurent Gounet from the World Bank, working with central banks, continues to work with them, and states to implement a financial system that is efficient and will help meet the Sustainable Development Goals. So before we go to the direct exchanges, I would like to remind those who are listening to us that all the discussions that we're going to have today have already been formulated in a publication that will be available at the end of the month. You will see all the contributions that will have been made by Laurent, Sonia, Marjolaine, and myself in the framework of this research that we have done in conjunction with the government of Senegal and the World Bank and Better Than Cash. We have worked with more than 20 companies from different sectors. This is a study from Senegal, but similar studies will be provided from other countries, including Jordan, just to mention one country. Right now, what is available at betterthancash.org, you can see the various payment plans taken up by some companies. You will see their challenges, the difficulties, the opportunities, and the benefits for their workers. Now, I think we can now go straight into the conversation and trying to challenge the status quo. More than half of all workers worldwide are paid in cash, but they are also excluded from all forms of social coverage. So, Laurent, the digitalization of salaries in the private sector, structurally, this is an issue which concerns the private sector, companies. But in the end, how should the state also be concerned about this question? Laurent, the floor is yours. So what the states are looking for is to find all the means possible to boost the economy permanently. When you talk about digitalization of salaries, you're talking about financial inclusiveness. And when you digitalize financial operations by digitally including all these people, small and medium-sized companies, they leave a trace in the system, digital trace. So whenever there's a transaction, you can look at the data, you could draw this data, and you can create scoring grades for banks, and this can create a structure to create credits to reduce the asymmetry in information. So the state has every interest in pushing for digitalization of financial transactions, even the smallest ones, because at the end of the day, this is what the state wants to make possible. It wants transactions to be digitalized so that those who use digitalized financial transactions have more security. There's also the issue of cybersecurity, but that is another subject. So why does the state, why is it in the interest of the state to show the way? Because The state is the first payer, the first payee, the main payee. They pay all the pensions, they pay a lot of salaries, they also collect taxes, fees for schooling, etc. So there are a lot of transactions, B to G, B to B, B to B, that go through governmental institutions. And since it's the supplier and the receiver of these financial flows, they have to set the example by digitalizing these financial exchanges. But to close the loop, it also has to motivate companies to digitalize salaries, because that is what's going to boost digitalization. So it has an essential interest in digitalization. So Laurent, the first question that comes to mind is, do you have some examples of the mechanisms, the facilities that the government wants to put in place to motivate the private sector to digitalize salaries? Yes, there are a couple of examples. In fact, in Senegal, where I am currently based, we have a loan being developed with the government of Senegal, and part of that loan will contain a matching grant where companies will be able to draw on this fund 50% of the fees to digitalize salaries. Take some company in the agricultural sector. If this company is interested in digitalization, but know that there's an underlying cost for software, for installing a system that is e-money capable, they will have a fee involved, and the government will take on 50% of the cost. We hope that it's an incentive that will be efficient in Senegal to motivate a lot of countries to take up digitalization. Sonia, you've worked with a lot of digitalizers. Are there other examples of that regulators are putting in place? I'm talking about central banks, for example, that could provide incentives for digitalization for paying salaries in general. Yes, and I think that the best example was unfortunately shown at the beginning of the pandemic, because the central banks of several countries, this is something that we saw in several countries throughout the world, especially with the central Bank of the West African states, that encouraged digital payments, particularly to reduce the health risks that inherent in cash use. And to that end, they implemented very robust measures along with the private sector to lower the commission fees, but also they intervened to limit the transaction thresholds. There are very specific thresholds today for thresholds, cash transactions to reduce risks. And the last point, which is very important, is the streamlining of the costs of digitalization. So these are actions that the central banks can put in place to motivate companies to digitalize. And then there's a legal framework where the state can be active. The member state of Senegal, since 2014, has deployed everything above 100,000 CFA francs. Its financial wiring has to be done through such payment through checks. So making digital payments through the state could benefit the minimum salary, which is 40,000 francs CFA per month. So the central banks have some instruments that are now available on the market. But if I look at companies, and I look at you, Marjolaine, this is my question. Among all the parameters that countries today face in the context of this crisis, how is the priority given to digitalization of payments will be important? How important will digitalization be? Can companies focus on other things? Why should they look at that in particular?
Oui, merci beaucoup Jean-Pascal. C'est justement quelque chose qu'on a pu un peu confirmer dans plusieurs pays.
Yeah, thank you very much, Jean-Pascal. And that's something that we've been able to in many countries during the entire period of the pandemic. You know, there are a number of companies that saw even more than ever the need to digitize their payrolls in a context where their workers could not gather in the same place to receive their payment, and therefore finding digital solution would allow to continue the operation and continue, you know, supporting workers in many different businesses areas. So that's something that we saw in a significant way in Bangladesh, for example, in the textile sector, and the prioritization of the government and company, you know, were allowed to continue to pay their workers who could not, you know, meet in factories to collect their salaries, their paychecks, and who, of course, needed their monthly payments to feed their families and continue to live in the context of COVID-19. So, in fact, indeed, it gave a stronger will, you know, determination to many companies in the sectors, you know, because they saw the importance of digital payments. And the other element that we saw on the part of some companies in Senegal, we had a particular case, for example, where they told us how much it helped them, and it was also for being able to maintain the supplying of, you know, commodities and anything that they needed to continue. So we have a case study about the production of milk and of dairy products in Senegal with the Shepherd, milk plant. You know, they had done their transformed their system at a digital level at the end of 2019, and now they could pay their 800 milk producers in the northern part of Senegal directly on those accounts. And they confirmed to us that during the COVID period of time, if they had not done that conversion before COVID, they would have had problems paying their producers and therefore continue, you know, with the supplying of these products during the health crisis. So, and in the end, you know, it's also an issue that many companies are asking themselves. You know, there are the benefits, you know, when you digitize your payroll in terms of efficiency of their income, you know, and their revenue. So the current context shows very well how understanding in the cost of paying people in cash and the impact it can have on the net margin, on the revenue of the company can have, you know, a significant impact, you know, in the health crisis. So indeed, we're talking about cost. So I would like to go back to you, Senator. I don't understand. I'm thinking myself as CEO of a company, for example, and I pay my workers in cash. You know, and when you tell me that the costs associated with cash, I don't understand that. What are the factors that are, you know, part of the costs that are associated to the pay in cash to my workers? That point is very interesting, and all the more because during the interviews that we've been able to have with the companies, one of the key elements that has been mentioned several times and repeatedly, in fact, is that, you know, for us, you know, digital services are much more expensive than cash payments, you know. So, so on the one hand, there's, you know, the lesson is that in the end, we actually don't know how much, you know, cash, you know, payroll is costing us, and we realized with a fairly analytical method that these amounts were often very understated and estimated. So what do we include in this cash management of payroll? There's a direct cost and indirect cost. You know, direct cost includes particularly the staff that is typically involved in the management and the distribution of this cash, you know, the spend time doing that, but also let's not forget the bonuses, you know, that these people receive. And also sometimes there are costs related to transportation, the transportation to bring this cash to the place, you know, to the working place. And we know that sometimes some companies need to use, heavy security services to protect this cash because the amounts are very high. So at the same time, we have also indirect costs, and that is often that aspect that companies understand. Indirect costs are the time spent by the entire company and the entire staff of the company that is dedicated to that task, and often it's diluted, within the activity of daily activities of the company. And we have some other elements sometimes, for example, especially the impact on the production time. Typically today, we've been able to listen to many companies who told us that for many workers to get their cash pay, for the best one, could in the best possible scenario they could get them in 2 to 5 hours, but sometimes it could take 2 days. So that it's a waiting time, it's a production losses, and associated related to that. We also have this risk of making mistakes and all the consequences, So when you put all that together, today we estimate that actually in the cases that we've been able to assess and to study, 6 to 10% of the entire work mass, 6 to 10% of the salary mass, and you're talking only about the costs that are associated with payments in cash of the workers. That's huge. And when those companies have discovered that figure, how did they react? So most of them were very surprised because actually they had, in fact, they didn't realize at all that those costs, existed. And Marjolaine mentioned earlier, there's a problem of underestimating these factors because it is in practice, in the daily practice, and it's almost an issue that they don't think about anymore. Now, I would like to try to move forward in our discussion and look at the financial sector because, let's suppose as the CEO of a company, I am now convinced that it's important to start digitizing my payroll for the benefit of my workers, and everybody. But Laurent, I'm turning to you now. You work with government to improve the productivity of the financial sector. I'm a CEO now. I would like to digitize my payroll, and then now today, what are my options? What are the products that exist on the financial markets to support the companies that want to make that transition? So I don't know every solution that exists on the market, but what I do know is that some banks like Société Générale and Cobank have been already exploring those synergies for a while now. What Société Générale or Cobank does, they take clients as companies, and after that, they look at deploying a number of complementary services for the benefit of those companies, and one of them is to digitizing their payroll. So, for example, Société Générale, the bank has a subsidiary called YOP, which is deployed and present in most of the countries, or maybe all of the countries of the economic area of Western Africa. It is in connection with its headquarters to promote this area of activity in particular. So Ecobank, I think, is developing also Ewallet. I'm not sure that their approach is fully integrated to make loans to SMEs, and after that, they can see how they can offer additional services to the companies. But that's part of it. And there are other actors, but they have less integrated services. And I think that more and more banks will move forward in that area with solutions and products that have to do with digitizing payroll. So I think it's going to, it's going to increase, that tendency, that trend, So we heard about the trend of digitizing the payroll with the banks and the partners. I would like to turn to Sonia now. Do you think that today there's an opportunity so that non-banking actors, can be there also in the area of payroll digitizing? Yes, absolutely. We see that indeed because it's really a service about which many payment actors are positioned. It's a market that's developing, and we have these issuers of electronic money who are working back to phone operators, phone carriers in a traditional sense. So typically, you would find big brands like Orange Money or Leopold Senegal, but in other countries it would be MCM Money in Côte d'Ivoire or Aircel. And they actually supplement that offer, but more on the transaction side, because indeed they are not allowed alone to provide credit offers or credit products, as Laurent explained earlier, that like bank can do. Therefore there's this idea to create partnerships when indeed these big companies are able to do that. And to complete that picture, we have both those banks, we have these what we call the assimilated operators, because these are the main ones on the market now. But we also have, there are also some other actors such as a fintech, and I'm going to mention, for instance, actors like Louisville Money or Wave Money, which for themselves have it's their main activities. They've been distributing money in electronic fashion for a long time and forever. And in that context, what will distinguish them from the others, that they are independent, in terms of, because there's a SIM card, so multi-operators, so that will allow them to strongly distinguish themselves. And lastly, there's a last type of actors that we can call aggregators, to illustrate, that would be a brand like Touch or Petunia, once again in Senegal, who have the ability to be both multi-carrier, but can also in the end provide several types of forms of payment to reach those workers. So now the landscape is rather vast, and diversified in terms of actors, which have naturally distinguish themselves in terms of distribution network, in terms of SIM cards or electronic wallets, and also new business models that are a little bit different. So, Laurent, is there this geographical distribution, and especially, for example, a bank that would want to support its particular client in a rural area? Is it able to do it if it really wants to digitize payroll? And if I want to digitize payments with my bank, what are the benefits that Benefit could offer, or does it cannot offer, that fintech can bring in? And I would like to have a big understanding of the picture of the ecosystem. Actually, banks are very present in urban centers and not very much at all in rural areas. And there's a reason to that, is that banks are not authorized, in that economic region in Africa, to open what we call agent tellers, and that's makes a big difference, with the phone carriers or mobile carriers who can have a network of agents and then can develop these digital services, and banks cannot do it. And in fact, even microfinance companies can. So they are at a disadvantage about that, and it is why it is very interesting to see that Société Générale and Yop are complementary with one another. Société Générale cannot reach rural areas because it's way too expensive to have branch there, and they can have a network of agents, but they can do it via Yop. Yop issues electronic money, and based on that status, it can have a very large network of agents. So Société Générale might be actually the only bank that has circumvented the regulation to be present and to offer services on the entire territory. I think Ecobank followed that example and has that same strategy. Fintechs are different. Fintechs, because they're not, there's no regulatory framework. They can offer services that banks cannot offer. But the fintech status is not very, very clear in that economic region, because there's no indeed a regulation, or there's no innovation office, to framework to support this. But they have some solutions, and they are, they cannot move forward because they don't know at the level of regulation what they can do, how far they can go, and what they can develop. What we notice in that economic region compared to other economic regions that were better supported, the fintech are rather cautious, very cautious, and the services they offer are rather modest compared to what we can see elsewhere, because it's really a burgeoning cycle of innovation right now. So Marjolaine, now we're going back to let's go back into the perspective of a small and medium-sized company. With Laurent and Sonia, we've seen that we have an ecosystem with different type of factors. They can be banks, they can be eco-financing, fintech, issuers of electronic money that can support the digitizing of payrolls. and a payment of any workers in the broad sense. So today, based on the studies that have been done, in Senegal, in Bangladesh, in other countries, today, you have the feeling that there's a preference for one type of partnership or the other between a company that wants digitizing its payroll while other companies will move more toward banks, or do they move more towards fintech? I would like to see how the companies and the private sector is moving, as what kind of partnership they're creating in order to digitize their payroll.
Thank you for that question, Jean-Pascal. As Sonia and Laurent have said, what's very interesting, what we found in Senegal and the examples from other countries, is to see the absolute diversity of supply that there is. It depends on the size of the company and on the number of employees that it wants to digitalize in their payments. But what's very interesting in Senegal is that we quickly saw that because of certain regulations and laws and infrastructure issues, most contracted employees were paid by bank transfer. That was the traditional way of paying. Someone with a contract with a work contract could open a bank, but it wasn't very easy for other people in the value chain. All the other workers, temporary contracts, seasonal contracts, limited term contracts. And that, of course, accounts for a lot of workers in Senegal and in that region. So a lot of aggregators, mobile portfolios, mobile wallets wanted to digitalize things for that kind of worker, to give them a formal banking service with underlying formal financial services. That's one of the new things that we've seen in the last 4 or 5 years in many countries, especially in the UNIMA zone. And as the example of Yob that Laurent mentioned and other players, it's not about competition between fintech, banks, and electronic operators. It's about working together to serve a great number of companies, diverse companies, and very diverse workers with very diverse profiles. In the Better Than Cash Alliance, we need that kind of diverse digital solution to scale up and to have digitalization of payments nationwide to scale. Marjolaine, I think what you're saying is that as a company, as heads of companies, as a head of a company, I can enter into partnerships with different types of financial service providers. But how do I decide who is going to receive their payment by digital payment, by financial transfer? So who is going to receive what? Who's going to receive an electronic wallet? I think that looking at the different companies that we've worked with the Statistical Association for Senegal, there are different types of contracts at play, particularly in Senegal. And this has to do with the limits to banking, the limits to opening a bank account. So there's a cost involved. So it depends on the contract, the labor contract that the companies have with their workers. And it's a relatively new proposal, finding non-banking solutions for different types of workers. And another point which is important, and it applies to women workers in particular, who often don't have formal contracts, fixed contracts, but yet they're extremely important in the value chain of many companies as distributors, end user distributors for the suppliers. This is very important to provide financial services to women and their economic activity, which will change the way they manage their finances and will have an impact on their economic output as they come into the formal sector. Sonia, I would like to turn to you because it seems that we're in this perfect world where everything is wonderful. There are opportunities cropping up. The ecosystem is quite diverse and already quite developed. Bank, fintech, digital payments. There are incentives available in some countries. There are laws that have been made, legislators, the central bank, that have started to create incentives through various forms of directives. But if you looked at the financial services, is there really an opportunity for, let's say, fintech? Is there opportunities for fintechs to position themselves in this segment of the digitalization of workers' payments? And what does this opportunity look like? It's a huge opportunity, in fact, because indeed, through the digitalization of salaries, these suppliers will be able to have an impact on companies, but on all the workers that work for these companies. So given the size of the companies, you're going to have more or less a significant number of workers. But what is at play for these suppliers is the ability to open up these mobile money flows. So by working on this segment and on this type of product, they can both be at the service of a company, but be at the service of 200, 300, even thousands of employees. Take the Compagnie Sucrière, the sugar refining company. You might have 9,000 workers within a year working at the company. So that's very important, very significant. So opening accounts, so they're going to enrich their client base. And for the suppliers of these services, it's an excellent way to feed this ecosystem. And when I mean feed, I mean create a flow. I'm talking about these mobile money accounts and boosting their use. So you have to raise awareness among these populations that they have access to digitalization, but also in use for transfers, paying their bills, transferring credit. And we hope that these various credit facilities will be available to workers. I would like to continue with you, Sonia, to better understand things. The Compagnie Sucrière, the sugar refinery, this is a company, it's in the agribusiness. What is the breakdown of between permanent workers and the seasonal workers? They are day workers. Can you give us an idea to illustrate the case you just made? So for the sugar refinery, Compagnie Sucrière, 80%, even 90% of them are contracted on a day-by-day basis. It has to do with the sugarcane season and the processing. And then there's a seasonal factor because the sugarcane is cut twice a year, I think. So there's going to be a great change in the number of workers at any given time. And company has to be as agile as possible, as flexible as possible to meet the needs of these day laborers. And they need to be paid on a daily basis, maybe a weekly basis. And for the more stable contracts, maybe every 15 days. So these are payment cycles that are quite significant. These are variations which are quite significant. And from a cash management point of view, quite onerous. So the Compagnie Sucrière, the agribusiness, this is something you see throughout the continent where the number of permanent workers at a given company is less than the number of all the other companies that are in the supply chain. And it's these workers, in fact, who are not strictly employees. They are like suppliers. They supply labor, and they are on the margin, but they are the ones who are paid in cash and don't benefit from all the advantages coming from these payment methods, in contrast to people that have contracted labor contracts. I have another question about the position of workers. Maybe Sonia and maybe Marjolaine. I would like to, so let's start with you, Sonia. In an agricultural value chain, for these workers, would it be easy for me? I've now received my digital wallet payment. Now, let's say I want to buy something. I want to buy a bottle of oil. And I want to do it immediately. Is it easy for me to then pay using the portfolio, the wallet? That's a very good question. And that's the whole issue of fairness in the management of liquidity, of cash. And that is the main stake involved in digital payments, because cash availability provides the last mile of funds for the workers. The supplier has to make sure that cash is available for purchases in the network of people willing to take the patient. So there's capillarity, people willing to take the cash through these systems, shops, etc. We have done research analysis from various experiences, and it's really the main inflection point. The dialogue between the company and the supplier. The supplier service provider has to understand the company's payment cycles, the payroll that has to be paid out, and what it needs in order to be able to pay out in cash. And it's a two-way, three-way game to ensure quality of service from the providers and availability in cash where it's necessary and when it's necessary. But Marjolaine, when it comes to availability of cash and agents, Marjolaine, are there strategies that would make it possible today to juggle the the importance of cash availability to agents? What while we wait for cash and for cash to be available everywhere, what can we do? I think that's a subject that Sonia started to discuss. One of the conclusions of our research, the degree to which the company has to work with the financial service provider so that a solution is found that works for the employees that they want to reach out to. And often companies, and there is a question in the commentaries, which is, what is the cost of digitalizing? We've talked about the cost of cash, but what is the cost of the digital? And there's an investment in time and a certain monetary investment. And, companies say, I have a financial provider, so why do that? Financial service providers are already doing a huge work trying to make cash available when it comes to payments, but it's something that needs all the players involved to pull their heads together on. Another very important issue, other people have mentioned it in the questions, there's a lot of work to do to reduce cash out, to reduce these highs and lows of cash out cycles. What do you mean? How do you reduce the cash out? The idea is to come up with financial solutions, financial and non-financial services that could be paid digitally. So it's not a question of paying them digitally, paying the workers digitally, but knowing how they're going to spend that money that has been paid digitally so that the money can stay within the digital system and reducing the need to have access to their savings account. You will always need to have access to cash. We're not going to replace cash with the digital and get rid of cash. But in all the countries that we look at, we see that we need both sources of payments, but we need to develop products that will allow workers to use their payment digitally, to pay the schooling for the children, for example, digitally. That's something that Côte d'Ivoire has implemented. And perhaps one of the important elements of the research has been health coverage. Health services paid by digital means, access to a savings account, or sending money to one's family digitally. So all of these elements have to be put in the ecosystem in order to have the proper services so that workers can use them.
So what I understand is that the issue of digitizing the payrolls, it does not limit it to the day when we pay. It's also everything that's going to happen after the workers are paid, how to make sure that the workers can continue using their money in the digital way in that local ecosystem, with the local retailers to be able to pay bills, to be able to make some financial commitments in an electronic way. So that allows to circulate to manage, and limit the issue of liquidity. And I would like to go back to Laurent, because Laurent, you are used to, advising governments, and here, based on what I've just heard, let's imagine a scenario, that we are in a ministry and we hear all this positive feedback that we heard of what is possible, what can be done, where it can, how far we can reach. Now, today, wouldn't it be easier to enact a law to impose digitization, digitalization, and I could solve the problem and encourage the entire sector to, move in that direction? Would that be sufficient that the government do that? No, there are in governments and countries in which, a law and sanctions can work well, but in most countries, and especially developing countries, unfortunately, it doesn't work that way. Many companies are going to prefer to stay in the informal, system and will not implement the recommendation of the government. So the government has to find incentives, by communicating, and especially by saying to the private sector how beneficial it would be for them to digitize their payrolls. So, and after that, you have an entire, a palette of countries that have set up some very good solutions, and it's not always easy, and it's it's a case by case. It varies from one country to the other. Let me give you an example. I don't remember which country in South America that the government has set up a rewarding system. So there's some kind of a lottery system that allows to those who made an electronic transaction or using cash to win something, and so it encourages the users to ask and in fact demand that the transactions are made in an electronic way instead of cash. That's one example among others. Earlier I had mentioned the matching grant. So it's a fund with shared funds that will really encourage a lot of companies to jump, to make that quantum leap into the digital world. But we also need to sit around the table with the representative of the ministry, and that will be, and it will allow to see how the ministry in charge, or the ministries in charge of these issues, of what kind of package we're talking about, or what kind of a mix between carrot and sticks. We're going to be able to use. What is the combination that we're going to be able to invent in Senegal? A mix between the carrots, and the sticks. That there's a question coming from Chad, in fact, that I would like to say, understand in Senegal. Today, I'm a worker, and I was not used to receive my money in an electronic way, and now I receive it in an electronic way. Now, who is taking care of the costs associated with that? So it all depends on the service providers that means selected and the economic system that is set up, because today we see a large variety of actors in this area. So you have indeed some service providers who are going to implement withdrawal fees, for example. So therefore that will, and those costs will be borne by the workers. But you can also have providers that will provide the services entirely for free. So that is indeed at that moment you select those service providers and which financial partners you select, that these issues need to be talked about and covered, either in the case where loans might be provided to the workers. So that you could also have negotiations with the company, because the company might cover and these withdrawal fees and integrate it in the global plan for digitizing this system. So I'm going back to the proposal of Laurent, that is something, these are typically cost or fees that could be potentially be borne by or subsidized by the company. But once again, typically we realize that it's an issue that we notice in Senegal, but in other countries, or in Cameroon, in Cote d'Ivoire, these fees are clearly borne by the workers, because in their operating system and in their relationship with the financial services, they are fully ready to cover those costs, because they consider them some kind of value to make their money secure. Now, another question for Marjolaine, regarding Chad. Don't you think that in the end, do we have an idea of the habits of the workers that have started to receive their pay in an electronic fashion? Did you notice a change in the way in their financial habits? Do we have some feedbacks about that? It's an excellent question, and it's an issue on which many about which many operators and companies are thinking about. At the beginning, typically we see a lot of cash out on the same day. 100% of the pay is withdrawn, and therefore at the same time it can create a limit or put the brakes on in terms of the changing of the behaviors. That's at the beginning of the transformation, and this is also why that one of the examples that we've seen, I think it was in Senegal, indeed, with one of the companies that during the first month, all the money was cashed out, at the teller that is closer to the company, because you're not sure, that it's real and you want to get all your money there. Secondly, you use an agent that will be further, because I shouldn't do it just as I exit the factory when I receive my pay. I'll do it later when I'm home. And therefore, gradually we've seen that that people were starting to withdraw their money as late as possible and as far away as possible from the factory, from their factory. So we see a change and evolution in the behaviors, and we saw also that when the financial service providers manage to develop products that are specifically targeting the workers by looking at what are their operating modus operandi and their financial needs, you can have products that can be very successful with workers, for example, savings product or insurance products, or transfer of money services, or bill payments services. And that's something that's very important for the operator, but for the entire financial digital system, because the issue, the challenges is now to keep all that money in the digital world and to make sure that the accounts are used as much as possible, the account. So that's it. So in the end, by listening to you, it raises a question, that sends me back to Chad. I'm turning to Sonia, and the next one would be for you, Laurent. In the end, digitizing payroll, probably, how do we think about them? We think them for, is it to solve the problems of the company or to solve the problems of the workers primarily? Sonia. So I think that today we have a solution that are rather fragmented. We have solutions for that are targeting people, and then they have solutions targeting the companies. I think that's indeed is part of the issues that will have to be discussed and seen in the next few years to better cover and to better know, in fact, the needs of those workers. Because today the approaches are more like a mass market type of solutions. with indeed, transfer services, bill payment services, credit, phone credit, services as we mentioned earlier. So I think that tomorrow, when these providers will be better and will better understand and they better know their workers, and better but also better understand the needs of the company, will have a solution that will be a better package that both, meet the needs of the company in terms of providing credits, financing and supporting their cash needs, but also the needs of the workers. So I think that's there where there's a real challenge, because these segments are completely different. So the issue of adopting is key. The colleague in Chad who seems to say that yes, once you launch a project, you have an interoperability project launched at the regional level, all the costs associated with financial transactions will be drastically reduced, and that will allow to have a massive increase of the adoption of electronic payments. Laurent, are you also optimistic in terms of the impact of the interoperability project, or in terms of adoption of electronic payment? In fact, I'm more than optimistic. I think it's going to be a decisive turning point in terms of the digitizing of money during the WAEMU. Today, the fees are rather high. I see that every day. When I want to pay a bill, when I need to pay someone, I have to go through Orange Money, and it's very expensive. And I can only send money to Orange Money. In other words, somebody who tells me I have an account at free, I cannot pay him. I have to do a whole gymnastics. It's complicated to withdraw the money, deposit it somewhere else. So it's not easy. Tomorrow, interoperability will only break down all these barriers between the operators and but also between the banks, but it will also eliminate all the barriers between the countries, because I will from there on be able to do a transfer from my account in with Orange Money to somebody who has an NTN account in another country in the WAEMU region, or who has a bank account. So all of those barriers will disappear. And I know that, these transactions will go through the GUMR version 2.0, completely terrible solutions, but I know that the central bank is currently buying USSD code, with the mobile phone operators. It's a 4-digit code that will be common, with the same for all the countries in the region. So with that code, not only will you be able, this code will allow you, in fact, for those who are in remote areas and who don't have an access to 4G network, who have a basic phone, to nevertheless make some transfer and transferring money using a code for which the price will have been negotiated at the very low rates. That's it. So those transfers you'll be able to do them within a country and towards other countries. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Sonia, Laurent, and Marjolaine. I think that we have only 2 minutes left. The discussion was very intense and very good, and the questions from the participants were numerous in the Q&A. I think that we will be able to go back to some of them and send the answers, in writing. I would like to explain again that all the participants that are connected, that all the recommendations, that the results that have been shared today are part of a study that will be published at the end of March, a study that covers the case of Senegal, and a study that is part of a movement where we've looked at several different countries to see how digitizing of payroll can increase the productivity of companies, to promote decent work, and in turn to stimulate the economic growth. I would like to thank you very much for your contribution and participation, and I'm giving back the floor to Maxine. Thank you very much, Jean-Pascal. So we are at the end of this meeting, and I see that our participants are still connected. They stayed all the way till the end, which shows that our discussion was very informative and interesting. Would like to thank them to be part of our webinar. I would like to thank all the members of the panel for the quality and of their presentation, and also the interpreters that have allowed us to have this event in 2 languages. Thank you very much to all, and we hope to see you again in the next few weeks for a new DFI webinar will be organized and convened. In the meantime, we'll say to you, have a great day. Goodbye.
Au revoir.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye, everyone.